Right, testing 1, 2, 3. It looks like I'm frozen here. All right, there we go. Makes this okay. Good. All right, everyone, welcome to the show. Today we have a lot to cover. Well, not too much to cover, but good amount. Let me share my screen here. Hold on for one moment. Okay, there we go. All right, welcome to the show today. It is November 11th, 2025, and in today's episode, we're going to cover a number of topics, including but not limited to consumer sentiment tanking for Americans. It's really bad. It's been going down ever since really recent data, so we're going to cover that. We're also going to cover a Bank of America report that states that I believe one-third of low-income U.S. households are living paycheck to paycheck, and the report is showing that this is increasing over time and will continue to increase over time due to the quantitative easing that the Federal Reserve is going to implement in its next easing cycle. So stay tuned for that. I'll get into those details in a moment. And then the government shutdown is resolved, coming to an end, thanks to Democrats caving on healthcare subsidies that they were battling for the last almost 2 months now. And so we're going to cover that because that's not the end of it. You think that's the end of this whole saga, but it isn't. And yeah, it's just wild. I'm speechless because it's just unbelievable. So please like, share, subscribe to the channel, comment your thoughts below. And we're going to go right into our first business. Let's go into this one, the government shutdown. This is from a really great creator named Brian on his YouTube channel. You can follow it on Clear Value Tax. And he breaks down why this agreement between Democrats and Republicans in the Senate isn't as valid as you think it is. So, for example, on Sunday in a late session voting between Democrats and Republicans, what happened was they passed, with 60 votes necessary, they passed a bill to fund the government until mid to late January. And so this just got the necessary votes to do so. But in order to do this, they needed to have assurance, the Democrats needed assurance that there will be a vote on healthcare subsidies or programs. And that's what Republicans are saying that they will do. But this bill is only funding the government till sometime in January, which is really not that long at all. So he's going to cover why this saga is far from over.
The government shutdown has now been resolved. The Senate voted on the government funding bill. They needed 60 votes to pass it. The vote was 60-40, enough to get it through the Senate. 52 Republicans voted in favor, and 8 Democrats voted in favor. So the bill is now advancing to the House of Representatives, and Speaker of the House Johnson has called back the House of Representatives to vote on the bill. The bill is expected to be voted on sometime this week, most likely tomorrow, on Wednesday, and it is expected to pass because they just need a simple majority in the House of Representatives to get it through. Now, once the House of Representatives passes the government funding bill, then it's going to advance to President Trump, and President Trump has backed this bill. Therefore, once he receives it, he's going to sign it, and ultimately, the government shutdown has now been resolved. All right, now with that being said, what is in this government funding bill? Did the Republicans get what they wanted? Did the Democrats get what they wanted?
And also to explain for context too, in order for funding the government, there needs to be a simple majority in the House of Representatives. So basically one more vote. So 50-49, or like, for example, or 200-199, a vote like that would pass a bill for funding the government. However, in the Senate, that's not the case. You need a larger majority. You need 60 votes. And so Republicans did not have 60 members in Congress, so they needed some Democrats to support them. So in this recent session, on Sunday evening, 8 Democrats went with Republicans to pass the bill that did not ensure subsidies for healthcare. And this is going to cause likely many healthcare premiums to go up. And so that's a whole other story, but that's just some context for you all.
So we're going to dive into this. Okay, here's what happened. There are 100 seats in the Senate. The Republicans control 53 of them. To pass a bill in the Senate, they need to get 60 votes. Therefore, even though the Republicans have the majority in the Senate, they still have to work with the Democrats to get the necessary 60 votes. And the Republicans and Democrats were clashing over the expiring Obamacare subsidies. They're going to expire on December 31st of this year. But to be fair, I mean, they were fighting over many things, but this was the biggest disagreement. This was their focus. Now, here's the agreements. The Senate Republicans promised the Democrats that they'll hold a vote on the Obamacare subsidies, whether to extend them or not. The deal was that they're going to take a vote on this by the second week of December. But I want to bring this to your attention. Just think about it. The agreement is that they're going to vote on this, but is it going to pass? Well, they're saying that the votes on extending the Obamacare subsidies that they're going to do, it is expected to fail in the Senate. And that's why the Democratic Party, especially the leaders of the Democrats in the House and the Senate, are very upset with the 8 Democratic senators that voted with the Republicans to reopen the government.
And it makes sense to be upset if you're on that side of the argument, on that side of the on that side of the aisle, because you went through all of these weeks of pain, hundreds of thousands of government workers not getting paid, many of them working their jobs full time, hardly ever taking any paid time off at all, if any time off, such as the the air traffic controllers, and etc. All these government workers, or some of them aren't even able to work, many of them not receiving a paycheck for a whole month. And you do all that in order to battle and hopefully win the argument against the Republicans for healthcare subsidies to go down, premiums to go down. And in order to pass this bill on Sunday does not include healthcare subsidies. So it just seems like this sort of standoffish battle between these two parties was all for nothing for what it looks like.
Now, I want to tell you this, and this is the crazy part where you're probably going to just want to shake your head in disgust. So you have to realize that this bill is just a temporary government funding bill that's going to keep the government funded until the end of January, so January 30th of next year. So that's about 2.5 months away, right? Now, I want you to think about that. They're going to vote on the extension of the Obamacare subsidy sometime in December, right? And that is expected to fail. So what do you think is going to happen? The Democrats are going to be pissed. And then what do you think is going to happen when January 30th rolls around? The Republicans...
He makes a really great point here, because you don't need a grander majority to pass the healthcare subsidies bill, whatever that looks like. And so more likely than not, all the Republicans are not going to vote for the healthcare subsidies, and all the Democrats will vote for this healthcare subsidies. And then what's going to happen? I think if it's hard to say, but I believe that the Democrats will be under pressure to, again, prolong a government shutdown in 2026 after January 30th if the healthcare subsidies are not included in legislation. But it's just crazy because you're just postponing this fight from what it looks like to me, unless they don't battle them at all. And they just act as controlled opposition or anything like that.
Republicans and Democrats are going to be butting heads again. And then there's a real possibility of another government shutdown just 2.5 months from now. And then we got to go through all this drama again. Now, can we please have an honest conversation here? So the government shutdown...
Okay, so that's the only thing I wanted to go through about the government shutdown. That's the biggest thing that many Americans don't know, and I didn't know this until recently, is that this bill that's being passed, that the stocks market's celebrating and a lot of people are happy about, they're going to get their paychecks back and all that. The issue is that this funding is only until late January. That's it. Less than 3 months. And so this is what many Americans don't understand. And I didn't know either, is that this fight could continue into next year. And the drama is not over at all unless the Democratic Party and its leaders decide that subsidies and healthcare aren't worth fighting for. And they just, pass the bill no matter what, which would kind of discredit their whole message and their movement and all that. But I digress on that point. So let's move on to another topic, which is consumer sentiment. Now, I'm going to find an article on consumer sentiment because there's 2 articles that kind of go hand in hand with it. The Bank of America one, where nearly 1/3 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, but also consumer sentiment. And this data right here, this data set is so crucial, is so key, because the government is technically shut down still, even though the bill passed on Sunday. The House of Representatives votes tomorrow, I believe, on passing the bill, and it's going to go to President Trump's desk tomorrow to fund the government, either Wednesday or Thursday. And so the government is still shut down as of today, November 11th, 2025. And so this data is so key, is so important because, oh, looks like I can't go on this website. This data is so key and important because so much influence is heavily relied upon very little data. The Federal Reserve has to make key decisions with cutting interest rates, raising interest rates, keeping interest rates steady, etc. And so this is what the economists and financial professionals are going to be paying attention to. And this was last week, but again, I wanted to cover this because this is so crucial, and I didn't get to cover this on my show yesterday because I didn't get a chance to have the show. But again, consumer sentiment nears its lowest level ever as building worries over the shutdown. The Secretary of Transportation, Duffy, stated that I believe about 10% of flights are going to be canceled completely if a government shutdown bill wasn't passed on Sunday, which it did pass, but back on Friday, 10% of flights are going to be canceled or heavily delayed. And we're seeing this sort of worrisome and anxiousness among many millions of Americans sort of seep into this data, and we're seeing it very loud and clear right here as this consumer sentiment level is at its lowest in more than 3 years. And again, likely 5 years ago when the pandemic happened, that's probably when consumer sentiment was at its lowest, when many people lost their jobs, when inflation started skyrocketing due to the quantitative easing the Federal Reserve was implementing to stir up the economy during a pandemic. Now we're seeing something very similar here. And it's just fascinating. The current conditions index slid to 52.3%, a drop of nearly 11% last month, with future expectations measured to fall to 49. So again, it's very worrisome. So worries, let's read this together. Worries over the government shutdown surged in the early part of November, pushing consumer sentiment to its lowest in more than 3 years and just off its worst level ever. So barely off its worst level ever, according to the University of Michigan survey. So this index of consumer sentiment posted a reading of 50.3 for the month, indicating a decline of over 6% on the month and about 30% from a year ago. So a year ago, this time around, it was 80%. Now it's at 50.3%. So very concerning. And this is why, again, these government economic data is suspended right now. And this is why this information is very heavily favored and relied upon. And then another research that came from Bank of America today, actually, I believe, today, nearly 1/3 of low-income households in America are living paycheck to paycheck. And this is just another concerning warning sign right here in the economy. And many Americans are struggling struggling to purchase basic household items, gasoline, groceries, all necessities. These are not luxuries. These are necessities for living. And these are all becoming much more difficult because one of the reasons is, this is not limited to only tariffs, but one of the reasons is that the massive tariffs that the Trump administration has implemented puts upward pressure on many products across the aisle, and the vast majority of the tariffs affect not wealthy individuals' assets or stock portfolios, but it affects consumer goods, which low-income and middle-class Americans almost by a long shot purchase most of these items. So this is what is really important. So this study, let's continue. This study found that nearly 24% of all U.S. households, are classified as living paycheck to paycheck this year, meaning their immediate earnings go toward basic necessities. The share is slightly higher than last year, but the rate has slowed year over year. So the rate is slow, which is a good thing, but at the same time, it's still increasing. And this makes sense. I mean, this is one of the reasons why you can agree with him or disagree with him, but Zoran Mamdani, the mayor that was just elected in New York City, he ran his campaign on affordability and how he beat an incumbent like Cuomo, or not an incumbent, but someone with such a big name recognition as Andrew Cuomo has with being the former governor. It's really incredible how fast and quickly he rose in popularity and rose to fame and eventually won the mayoral election last week. And it's all because of affordability. And when the Big Apple, New York City, struggles with affordability, it's kind of telling you, it's a microcosm of what's really going on across the country. And typically I wouldn't say this, because I wouldn't say, oh, like, because one wealthy city is doing fantastic, the whole country is doing fantastic. I wouldn't say that at all, because it's not true. But in this case, it is. So it's just something to keep in mind here. Yeah, this is very concerning. And then to tie along with this, let's close these two. Stocks such as, or excuse me, not only stocks, but companies such as Chipotle and Kava fell in their earnings, I believe. Oh, apologies for that. So they both fall due, and this shows a sign of recession. And I missed my notes. I think I forgot my notes, so I couldn't find them. But yeah, it was very concerning, because these two companies, I can't find the article right now, but just to sum up what happened with the companies is that, oh, here we go. There's an older article here, but Sweet Green and Kava fell. And it shows that younger Americans and middle-class Americans are not purchasing these products that they used to purchase all the time, which is very concerning. Geez, gosh, can't even read these articles. Yeah, it's not a huge deal. I can't pull it up. But basically, yeah, like a lot of these companies, Chipotle, Kava, even McDonald's at one point saw their sales falling for breakfast items, fast food items. And it shows that many Americans, millions of Americans, are pulling back on eating out, maybe even skipping breakfast in order to save a couple, or not more than a couple bucks, trying to save as much money as they can. And this is a warning of a recession, warning of signs of that. Despite the stock market hitting all-time record highs every single month, it's not telling the full story of what's going on with the American people. In fact, if you look up how many Americans are actually invested in the stock market, it's not a majority of Americans. I'll look it up right now, because I think it's less than 50. Okay, so it's a little over 50%. So 62% of Americans are invested in the stock market. So a little bit more than a majority. But again, this is not an indicator of the economy doing well when you see CPI, PPI inflation going up, and et cetera, et cetera. So I know I got a little bit off a tangent there, but yeah, so let's go into another article. Yeah, President Trump proposed a 50-year mortgage, which makes Americans pay a lot more interest. So it's not really a solution for that, in my opinion. So let's check. Yeah, it's really slow today. Okay, so gold edges higher as weak U.S. jobs data raise rate cut prospects. So today, gold went up after 3 days of gains as traders weigh in the weak jobs data and the imminent restart of the U.S. government. So there's been a lot of really bad news as far as the jobs reports have been negative. The one report in September was somewhat better than expectations, but in October was poor. we saw that the hiring for Q4 has slowed down considerably, which has led to the Federal Reserve very likely cutting interest rates in a continual cycle for at least heading into Q1 of 2026. And I believe this is going to continue because there was a tightening of monetary policy since the beginning of 2025. And part of the reason I think they're going to start cutting interest rates, for one, is that not only is President Trump pushing for the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates even more, because if that wasn't apparent enough, then I think you're living under a rock, because we've seen President Trump constantly bash the Fed Chair Jerome Powell for not cutting interest rates sooner by 2 to 3%. So that's definitely going to happen, because his term is going to end. Powell's term, the Fed Chair's term, is going to end, I believe, next March or April. So it's coming up. And so we're going to see much more heavier cuts to interest rates in the next FOMC meeting. And that's something to pay attention to, because due to that information that we're seeing, gold is going to rise. And we're seeing that right now. The bullion rose to around $4,100 an ounce after data from ADP research showed U.S. companies shedding over 11,000 jobs per week on average in the 4 weeks ending on October 25th. So again, the U.S. companies are shedding over 11,000 jobs a week. That ADP report found, which is a very bad sign for the economy or the labor market. And it shows the weakness of the economy. And what are investors going to do when they see that information? When you see concerning information, concerning data regarding the economy, investors are going to flock to gold for stability and security when this happens. So investors are also awaiting a flurry of official data when the U.S. government ends the longest shutdown in its history. The restart, expected within days, right, tomorrow or Thursday, would remove the need for traders to rely on private data, or college surveys, ADP, these private companies conducting these surveys and studies, research studies and all of that, adding more certainty to their forecasts and lifting the fog over future rate decisions. Okay, I don't know why my mouse is like that. Anyway, so gold is rising. It rose 0.4% in the morning in Singapore time. Yeah, so that's not a surprise at all. Yeah, so see if there's anything else, but there's not a ton of news today, really. Let's see. Yeah, so I covered the Senate bill, covered that. Yeah, another headline right here: job seekers in brutal market turn to seasonal hiring. So Americans are having to work seasonal jobs, which again don't last a long time, a couple of months at most, to make ends meet. So yeah, I think that's all we're going to cover here. Again, I apologize for not having a more descriptive breakdown. I misplaced my notebook somewhere. I left it at somewhere else. So I'll definitely have a more condensed breakdown of the news for tomorrow's show. So that way I'll be more prepared for that. So yeah, we will go into that tomorrow. But yeah, some things to keep in mind for sure. Let's cover this actually before I head off, because this is really important information about AI, data centers. All this is really crucial, really important. So yeah, let's cover this. So AMD is a company that's very heavily involved with AI. I believe they're a mini conductor for infrastructure for artificial intelligence. I'm 90% sure that's what they do, and they're heavily involved with artificial intelligence chip manufacturing. So AMD is expected to see its data center revenue increase 60% over the next 3 to 5 years, up from $16 billion in 2025, as the company pushes deeper into AI space and works to steal share from rival NVIDIA. The output comes from AMD CEO Lisa Su, who said the company sees the total addressable market for AI data centers increasing to $1 trillion over the next 5 years. during AMD's Financial Analyst Day in New York Tuesday. So yeah, so just more information showing how profitable artificial intelligence investment is going to become in the next 5 to 10 years. And it's not only a private venture in the sense of like, oh, the internet is a new invention. This is something that other countries, adversaries to the United States, like China, all these companies or all these countries are trying to develop artificial intelligence as fast as possible. We're seeing it all around the world to gain an advantage, to gain whatever it is that another country has over another country. And so that's we're going to keep that's what's going to happen. There's going to be lots of competition for AI and lots of money that is going to be poured into it. And that's what we've seen with Nvidia, with AMD, with Intel, with the Trump administration putting at least I believe a 10% stake, don't quote me on that, but a certain percentage amount of stake into Intel, trying to boost it and all of that. Not that I agree with that, but that's just been what's been happening right now. And just Palantir, for example, doing deals with Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United States government, and probably other countries or companies. And that's going to continue to happen. So yeah, that is all the information for today. And again, apologies for not having the more concise, more more of a breakdown specifically. Definitely have that tomorrow with my notebook and all the headlines I got on there. So see you all tomorrow.